Just as in the New York Times is reporting that earlier this year, the FBI warned one of President Trump's closest confidants, Hope Hicks, of repeated attempts by Russian operatives to make contact with her during the presidential transition. We should underline there's no evidence that Hicks did anything improper. The New York Times also reporting that senior FBI counterintelligence agency agents met with Hicks in the White House Situation Room at least twice because of this warning, giving her the names of Russians who had contacted her and said that they were not who they claimed to be. In addition, the special counsel, we're told, interviewed Hope Hicks yesterday and today, the New York Times says, as part of their probe into Russian interference and possible collusion by the Trump team. Stunning news, but I suppose not surprising that people were trying to get to Hope Hicks and they were Russians pretending to be people that they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, this confirms that there is a very sophisticated campaign conducted by the Russians to make contact and influence the Trump campaign. Hope Hicks hopefully was smart enough not to take the call. Other people may not have been as smart as her.
And the idea that they would interview her today and yesterday, not a surprise, given that Hope Hicks was on Air Force One that time when Donald Trump Jr. was trying to come up with his initial explanation for that meeting with the Russian government lawyer that he had been told was a Russian government lawyer. She wasn't actually, with dirt on Hillary Clinton, coming up with that initial explanation that was a false explanation.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just that episode that Hope Hicks would have been there for, Jake. She has been there from the very beginning. She's one of the Trump families, not just Donald Trump, but also Ivanka Trump and the rest of the Trump family. One of their most trusted, loyal advisors. She has been with them truly from the very beginning of all this. She was in the room for many of the important episodes on the campaign. She's going to potentially be a very important witness to this whole investigation.
And interesting, though, that the FBI, which President Trump is currently attacking and trying to undermine, earlier this year they were warning Hope Hicks, trying to give her this defensive briefing about people with nefarious intent, they thought, trying to reach out to her.
Well, and it makes me wonder, my gosh, what was going on in the campaign, where I'm certain the risks were there at that time, too. I think it's interesting to think about this, that in the future, political operatives, people who are working on campaigns need to start worrying about this. One of my criticisms of the FBI and Department of Homeland Security throughout the last campaign is I don't think they were aggressive enough about talking to the campaigns about what was going on and flagging for people. I'm glad they did this for Hope Hicks, but it really makes me wonder, what else do we not know?
Thanks, one and all. You guys were great. Great panel. Have a great weekend. Be sure to tune into CNN this Sunday morning for State of the Union. I have a great show. My guest will be the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, Alabama Senator Richard Shelby, who will talk about the Alabama Senate race, plus, of course, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, to talk about all things foreign policy. It all starts at 9 a.m. and noon Eastern. That's it for The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper, turning over to Wolf Blitzer. Have a great weekend. I will see you Sunday morning. Welcome back to The Lead. It may be the end of the work week for you, but that does not mean that the investigators into Russia's election meddling and possible Trump team collusion they're heading home for an early happy hour. Pamela Brown and our political panel are here to discuss the latest developments. But first, let me tell you about a status report from the team of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, which just this afternoon disclosed how wide the scope of their investigation has been in the case of the United States of America versus Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. The former Trump campaign chairman and his business partner were indicted, of course, you remember, for charges including money laundering and conspiracy against the U.S. relating to their lobbying for a pro-Russian government in Ukraine. Mueller's team told the U.S. District Court in D.C. today that it will produce, in this case, more than 400,000 items, including financial records, emails, and corporate records. 2,000 documents that the government is identifying as hot documents, meaning that they're especially pertinent to the case. Copies of 36 electronic devices, such as laptops, phones, thumb drives, and copies of 15 search and seizure warrants and related applications. In addition to dealing with the hostile witnesses and clever attorneys, the Mueller team has been fighting some Republicans in Congress and the pro-Trump media who have rapidly traveled from questioning the investigation to attempting to discredit it at every turn.
We are at risk of a coup d'etat in this country if we allow an unaccountable person with no oversight to undermine the duly elected president.
The people who are handling all of these sensitive investigations, it looks like they had their thumb on the scale of justice, tipping it toward Hillary and away from
That's
Donald.
an important.
As the investigation's pursuit inches closer to the White House, the president, too, is playing offense, suggesting that the FBI's reputation for objectivity is in, quote, tatters. All this as we're learning new details about the investigation this afternoon. The fiancé of George Papadopoulos, that's the former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russians. That fiancé just spoke with CNN to push back against White House claims that Papadopoulos was just the coffee boy. As you might recall, Papadopoulos joined the Trump campaign as a foreign policy advisor in early March 2016. Soon after, then-candidate Trump first referenced him as an advisor. On March 31st, Papadopoulos attended this foreign policy meeting with candidate Trump. CNN's Pamela Brown spoke with his fiancée and joins us now. And Pamela, she's fighting back for her husband to be against the attacks, including attacks from the White House.
That's right. And this is really the first time today, Jake, that we are hearing the side of George Papadopoulos, his side of the story through his fiancée. As you said, he was the former foreign policy advisor on the Trump campaign. And the fiancée really wanted to share things that Papadopoulos himself has not been able to discuss because, on the advice of his lawyers, he's not speaking publicly with the media as he awaits his sentencing. His fiancée, Simona Mangiante, an Italian national who says she too was interviewed by the FBI in the Russia investigation, strongly refutes claims by the White House and campaign officials that Papadopoulos only acted on his own without campaign approval and that he was nothing more than a coffee boy. What have you seen, what have you read that doesn't square with the George Papadopoulos you know?
George Papadopoulos has everything but a coffee boy. He's an outstanding personality, is very educated, articulated, and even his contribution to the campaign has been much more relevant than bringing coffee.
Why do you think the White House was so quick to come out and call him a coffee boy or a low-level volunteer?
I think they wanted to dissociate from the first person who decided to actively cooperate with the government on the right side. And probably the easiest way out is to dismiss his personality and lower him to a low-level volunteer.
And you don't believe he was?
I know he wasn't.
How do you know he wasn't?
He shared with me some details about his contribution to the campaign.
You say that he was consistently in touch with these high-level campaign officials.
Yes.
What was his interaction with Michael Flynn?
He was in contact with Michael Flynn, and he worked with Michael Flynn during the transition, and he was actively contributing to develop the foreign policy strategies for the campaign, and he didn't take any initiative on his own without campaign approval.
And Mangiante says Papadopoulos communicated with Flynn, Steve Bannon, and former campaign advisor Rick Dearborn about topics other than Russia. But she says he did interact with other top campaign officials, including Corey Lewandowski, Paul Manafort, and Sam Clovis earlier in the campaign about setting up Russia meetings. Now, they have all denied, downplayed, or have said that they don't ever recall interacting with Papadopoulos. She also says the campaign's deputy communications director, Brian Lanza, now CNN contributor, allowed him to do the only interview with the Russian news agency Interfax. Lanza declined to comment. As Papadopoulos awaits his sentencing, she says she hopes President Trump will pardon him. Of course, we reached out to the White House, and the White House did not provide a comment for the story, Jake.
All right, Pamela Brown, thanks so much. My panel's here with me. Just to remind people, Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, and among the statements he made that were true after he was caught in the lie, he had admitted that he met with a professor in England who had ties to the Kremlin, who said that people in Russia claimed that they had dirt on Hillary Clinton. And this was like April 2016. Robbie, obviously, is a former campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. I imagine that you're pretty interested in the case of Mr. Papadopoulos.
Well, this only seems to be going one direction. You know, there were frequent communications with the Russians. I was on your show in the summer, and Don Jr. said it was outrageous that I think he said it was disgusting that we implied that the Russians were trying to help the campaign. You know, at every point, everything they said, every refutation they made, has just been pushed away by the facts. So, yeah, I guess I'm just not surprised by any of this anymore. I think it'll just get deeper and deeper. I do think that they're likely to get to President Trump's financials and potential financial dealings with the Russians quicker than they're going to get to any of the issues of collusion, and that may actually end up being his real Achilles heel.
And this fiance was saying that he didn't do anything without approval from the campaign. I mean, that was one of the big messages that she was saying out there. And she was asked in a different interview, what would the title of the book about George Papadopoulos be? And I think she said The First Domino, which is a kind of an interesting thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to help her fiancé, and at the same time, she is not helping the Trump administration at all. And while I do agree with Robbie, this is all going one direction, man, if you turn into conservative media, the story you hear there is completely different.
Well, they're talking about Hillary, right?
Yeah, well, forget alternative facts. There's just completely alternative narratives and storylines. Very prominent conservative talk radio shows are on the airwaves telling their viewers, so what if they accepted some emails from the Russians? So what? It's a nothing burger. Well, I don't agree. It's sort of choose your own criminal adventure. It could be obstruction of justice, abuse of power, perjury, and, coordinating illegally with a foreign entity. But that's not what people believe. And so while the investigation is advancing, there's a lot of people I know who don't accept the very premise of this investigation. And so if there are charges brought, I'm very worried it can cause a lot of internal turmoil.
And not only that, but conservatives, pro-Trump media, Fox News and some of the talk radio that Amanda's talking about, they're pushing the idea that Robert Mueller, who had an impeccable reputation for integrity, that he is corrupt, that he is a tool of Hillary Clinton. I mean, just this goes beyond questioning individual acts or individual FBI agents. This goes to you heard the congressman saying that this was a coup d'etat. It's pretty stunning.
It's incredible, especially if you compare those statements and that narrative, that alternative universe of facts, to what Republicans said when Mueller was named as the special counsel. They used words like unimpeachable to describe Robert Mueller because his reputation is just so sterling. There wasn't even an avenue to criticize him as the pick for this job. So what this is about, Jake, is not about Mueller actually being corrupt or any evidence that these conservatives actually have before them right now. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. He fired someone from this inquiry because he found text messages that might have suggested this person was not without conflict, that he might have supported Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, and that would throw into doubt any conclusions he reached. So what this is all about politics. It's about winning in the court of public opinion, trying to undermine whatever conclusion Mueller reaches.
Everyone stick around. We got more to talk about. Is the Trump administration trying to erase science? The changes being made to the EPA's website that are causing alarm among scientists. That's ahead. Thanks, Brooke. For President Trump this evening, it's Sweet Home Floribama. The lead starts right now. Just days before the critical election in Alabama, the president heads to a campaign rally right across the border from Roy Moore's state. The campaign stop was previously seen as an attempt to help Moore while keeping him at arm's length. But given the accusations against Moore of sexually abusing young girls, still, after the president endorsed him in clear terms in all caps today, why the pretense? Who are you calling a coffee boy? The fiancé of the former Trump campaign aide who cut a deal with Robert Mueller speaks to CNN and comes to his defense, saying the Trump team had to have known what he was doing. Plus, the Trump administration at war with science. Why are references to climate change on the EPA's website disappearing as quickly as the ice sheets of Greenland? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin with our politics lead today, and with the critical race for Senate in Alabama in its closing hours and final weekend, President Trump and the Republican National Committee are throwing last-minute support behind Roy Moore, seeing a chance to keep the seat Republican. Of course, weeks ago, credible charges emerged that Moore, as an adult in his 30s, sexually assaulted two young teenage girls. The president's daughter, Ivanka, went the furthest of anyone in the administration, saying there's a special place in hell for those who prey on children. Pretty stark contrast to her dad's all-caps tweet today that Alabamians need to vote for Roy Moore. In less than an hour, President Trump will take off for Pensacola, right next door to Alabama. He will hold a rally there. Roy Moore will not be at the rally, we're told, but don't be surprised if Roy Moore is in the speech. Let's bring in CNN's Caitlin Collins, who's in Pensacola. And Caitlin, the president's trip to rally the base in Florida, right across the border, was scheduled before he was fully endorsing Moore. But now he's fully endorsing Moore. So why the pretense? Why not hold this rally in Alabama?
Well, that's a great question. And the White House has said time and time again that the president would not come to Alabama to campaign for Roy Moore. But, Jake, this is the next best thing. We are a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Alabama state line. And if Donald Trump shouted tonight, you could probably hear him in Mobile. And the White House has said that he finds these allegations against Roy Moore troubling and that if they're true, he should step aside. But in recent days, and including this morning on Twitter, we've only seen the president grow louder and more forceful in his endorsement of Roy Moore and his denunciation of his Democratic opponent here, Doug Jones. And though the White House has said publicly that the president finds these allegations troubling, we know privately that sources say that he doubts the women who have accused Roy Moore of sexual assault, and that he's even drawn comparisons between that and when the Access Hollywood tape was released during the presidential campaign last year, and several women then accused him of sexual assault. So though Roy Moore will not be in the building tonight, we know that the Moore campaign is encouraging their supporters to come here and attend this rally, and it's right by the southern part of Alabama, so we can expect a lot of Alabama residents to come out here tonight to see the president during this rally, Jake.
So for a long time, President Trump was silent on the issue of Roy Moore. He was overseas for some of it. Then he has worked his way up to supporting Roy Moore. How has the president's support, first he came out just against Doug Jones, and now he's full-throatedly embracing Roy Moore. How has that support affected the race? Has it changed the tide for Moore?
Well, it's certainly caused quite a change in tune of what people are saying about Roy Moore. When these allegations first came out, Republican senators were stumbling over themselves to call for him to drop out of the race and condemn him for these allegations that have been made against him. And now that the president has offered his full-throated endorsement of him, we've really seen them hedge off that criticism and say that it's up to the people of Alabama to decide. And then we've also seen the Republican National Committee change its tune and support Roy Moore in this race to the tune of $170,000. So the president's support has certainly helped him here in the last few days of this race, Jake.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Joining me now to talk about this and much more is Republican Congressman Scott Taylor from the great Commonwealth of Virginia. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So on Roy Moore, a few weeks ago, you told us that if it was your daughter that Moore had asked out or worse, you would break his face. What's your reaction to the president's full-throated, all-caps endorsement and now campaign stop for him?
Well, my personal reaction was basically the same as Ivanka's, right? So I probably lean to where she is on the issue. But, when you look at just raw politics, as the president said, I mean, the majority in the Senate is slim. So he's making a political calculation here. There's no question about it. And I also said in my interview that, look, I don't have a vote. CNN doesn't have a vote. The president doesn't have a vote. It will be Alabama that decides whether they want Roy Moore to be one of the two who are the voice for Alabama in the Senate. And we'll see what happens next week.
Does it concern you at all as a Republican member of Congress that if there is a Senator Roy Moore, this will be something that your party will have to deal with in terms of a guy who there are credible accusations against him? Clearly you think they're credible. And he might be something of a stain on the Republican Party in Washington.
Sure, it concerns me. I mean, we're talking about it now, and if he gets elected, we'll be talking about it again, I imagine. So it is concerning in some of the words that I've heard from him. Like I'm not even speaking about what the accuser said. My reaction was mostly from what he said, and so. Like I said, I kind of personally agree with Ivanka on that one. But yeah, sure, it's concerning. Absolutely. Because I think it will get in the way of more important issues. A
month ago when you joined me, you said the governor's election in your home Commonwealth, Virginia, which a Democrat won, you thought it was a referendum on Trump. Do you think this Alabama race has a larger message?
I'm not sure. I mean, I said that in Virginia because it's just like we said it was a referendum on Obama administration when Governor Bob McDonnell won, and that's historically it's kind of like that in Virginia because we're the first big election after presidency. So I just think intellectually, if we want to be honest, it's the same. So do I think that the Alabama race is the same? I don't think so. I mean, Virginia and Alabama are a little bit different, of course, but there's certainly a lot of national attention down in Alabama right now, just like there was in Virginia afterwards.
The Democratic Party, by forcing John Conyers and Al Franken to resign, have tried to, in their view, regain some sort of moral high ground when it comes to these issues of sexual harassment. Do you think that might work?
I don't think the topic of sexual harassment, the topic of, dating somebody that's underage or something like that, I don't see that with a political lens. I understand that there's politics involved there and there's some sort of jockeying for position, for moral high ground from the Dems right now. I don't think it will work because I don't believe that the American people necessarily see it through a political lens. Some do, of course, many do, but I don't. I don't see it as a political issue. Sexual harassment is a serious issue, and it's something that should rise above petty politics.
I guess one of the reasons I ask is because obviously the House Ethics Committee launched an investigation into one of your colleagues, Congressman Blake Farenthold from Texas, over allegations that he sexually harassed a former aide and then retaliated against her when she complained about him. The Office of Congressional Ethics cleared him, but he also paid her an $84,000 settlement of taxpayer dollars. He says he's going to pay that back. And Democrats are trying to make the case they get rid of their bad ones and Republicans don't. But moving aside from that, because you obviously don't see it that way, what do you think should happen in the Farenthold case? We've had two Republican congresswomen say that he should step down. What do you think?
Well, like you said just a little bit earlier, he was cleared with the ethics, but he did pay a settlement. And as we all know, in settlements in law, sometimes you do pay a settlement because it's cheaper than to litigate. I don't agree with paying settlements for sexual harassment cases, regardless of if you're Conyers or if you're Farenthold. I don't believe it's a political issue here. So I know that he was cleared. I know he paid a settlement. We're working towards legislation to stop members from being able to pay settlements based on sexual harassment. And it has to obviously have language in there that makes sure that you protect victims, of course. But again, I just don't see this through a political lens. I understand they're pushing out Franken and Conyers and trying to gain a moral high ground. But if you're sexually harassing somebody, you don't have a moral high ground. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. And I do think that members we should take steps as Congress, as leaders, to make sure that, number one, there aren't victims anymore in our House. Get that in order. And number two, that taxpayers aren't paying settlements for people's predatory behavior.
Did you see the story? I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but Congressman Trent Franks, who is resigning effective today, there are reports out there that he asked two women in his office if they would serve as surrogates for him and his wife. Politico is reporting that the women in question did not think that this was necessarily going to be done via test tube, if you understand what I'm saying, and that AP is reporting that the congressman offered them $5 million. He today, Congressman Trent Franks, announced that he was stepping down. Your reaction to this breaking news?
Well, I mean, it's sad and it's troubling. Look, I know Trent. He's a very nice guy. He's always been great to me. I'm not privy to all the details that have come out, but obviously his statement speaks for itself. Speaker Ryan's statement speaks for itself, and he's resigning. So it is troubling and it is sad, and it's something that I would have never have even thought that would have come up. But he's stepping down.
Yeah, generally it's not an issue that comes up. Congressman Scott Taylor, Republican of Virginia, thank you so much. Always good to talk to you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Lots to talk about, including the optics of President Trump holding a rally just over the Alabama-Florida state line. Is anyone convinced he's not really campaigning for Roy Moore? We'll ask our panel there. Look at this. They're walking out. All right. We'll ask our panel next. Stay with us. Back and continuing the conversation with my panel. So President Trump now fully behind Roy Moore, running for the Alabama Senate, running for the Alabama Senate seat, even though he's been credibly accused of sexually abusing two young teenage girls, and as a grown man, coming on to several high school girls. Today, President Trump tweeting, "Vote Roy Moore." This is the strongest expression of support we've seen for him. He's heading down to Pensacola right now to hold a rally across the border. About as close to Alabama as you can get without being in Alabama. Why the pretense? Why not just have a rally in Mobile or Birmingham? Why do it?
That's Trump. He likes to play games. But how does this story end? Roy Moore gets elected. That happens.
Probably.
Mitch McConnell says, there'll be a Senate ethics investigation. In what way is that a good outcome for Republicans? Until now, Roy Moore has been pretty good at evading the media. He hasn't answered questions. But guess what? Once you get to Capitol Hill, there is a pack of press reporters who will follow you from your office to the bathroom to the Senate floor. He won't be able to escape them. And he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that has a lot of message discipline. And while that's going on, while he's being hounded, the Senate ethics investigation is going to be going on. And that's going to be the gift that keeps giving for Democrats. And so go ahead, Donald Trump, have fun, give your speech, but even if Roy Moore wins, it's going to be a big loser for Republicans.
So I want you to take a listen to this interview with the RNC chairwoman, Ronna Romney McDaniel, talking about the Roy Moore endorsement.
So when it comes to what's happening in Alabama, who do you believe? Do you believe Roy Moore, or do you believe the women who have come out against him?
Well, we've said all along that these allegations are incredibly disturbing, that if they were proven true, that the candidate would be unfit to serve in office. But it's up to the voters of Alabama right now. This is democracy. They're going to see this play out. They get to make that decision. It's not up to me. And the president has said we want to keep the seat Republican. The RNC is the political arm of the White House, and we want to support the president's agenda.
Am I being too mean to say that she seems to be trying to have it both ways there? She seems to be saying, I take these allegations very seriously, but we're still going to put a whole lot of money in trying to elect this guy.
Exactly. It's essentially saying, you know, I see these allegations, I don't care about them. But the Republican National Committee, as you know, Jake, has always been an arm of the president when there's a Republican president in office. Same with the Democratic National Committee when there's a Democratic president in office. So Ronna McDaniel was in a tough spot. I think some Republicans would say the RNC made a mistake by getting out of the race when they did, before the president had taken a firm position on it. That puts them in this very uncomfortable position of having to get back in the race and sound like they changed their minds. But really, they didn't have a choice. The president says he supports Roy Moore. The RNC is going to support Roy Moore. I think the most interesting thing happening right now is the split you see between the administration and the RNC and McConnell and the NRSC, led by Cory Gardner, Senator of Colorado, who are saying they still don't support Roy Moore. They support an ethics investigation. And Cory Gardner told the Weekly Standard that he will never support Roy Moore. And I would take that to mean even in future races as well.
Well, Cory Gardner wants him booted from the Senate if it comes to that.
Yeah, I think one point on that, Rebecca is absolutely right. The RNC is an arm for the president, but they also play a leadership role for the Republican Party. And I am so happy that CNN staked out the chair there, because she has refused to answer questions. And that wasn't good enough. I want to know the explanation for how the RNC and the president changed their mind after more accusers and more allegations came out, because it's not like Roy Moore cleared his name during that time. And so she does have more of a responsibility for the party, not just to the president, but this is a fundamental problem with the party right now. A lot of people, especially as you saw on that tape, Ronna Romney McDaniel will just do whatever the president says.
And Robbie, how much of a chance do you give Doug Jones, the Democratic candidate there? One of the things that we hear from the voters down there is they don't like his position on issues. He's out of step with the voters of Alabama. He supports restrictions on gun ownership. He supports abortion rights. In retrospect, should the Democrats have picked somebody who maybe actually had a chance of winning?
Well, obviously, we didn't know that any of this was going on at the time that recruiting was happening. But no,
Roy Moore was a candidate.
Yeah, but I would actually argue that you know, those views are mainstream views. I think he is
in Alabama.
I think he has run a very strong campaign there. I think he has a good chance. I'd say it's a toss-up probably right now. There's a lot that's really tough about this race. That's always going to be. But I think this last point was the most important one. This bridge got crossed a long time ago. The President of the United States is on tape talking about sexual assault. The party knew this while he was their nominee. It's reported that Reince Priebus got off the train on the way to New York. We're in a really deep hole here, and I'm proud that you know, people in our party are stepping up and calling on people to step down.
The Democratic Party, yeah.
Yeah, but I actually think the congressman's point was good before. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. We got to clean the whole house. That's not going to happen while the President of the United States is still in office and is on tape talking about sexual assault.
Nobody go anywhere. We've got a lot more to talk about, including this bizarre story. One congressman resigning after admitting that he asked his own staffers about whether or not they would be surrogates for him and his wife. Is that really the whole story? Stick around.
The most trusted name in news.
We're back with our politics lead and the third resignation announcement from a member of Congress in just 3 days following accusations of sexual misconduct again. Minutes ago, Republican Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona said he's moving up his resignation date to today. This follows his abrupt announcement last night that he would leave Congress at the end of January after learning of an ethics investigation into allegations that he had sexually harassed 2 female former staffers. Some background here. Franks tried to explain that he and his wife have struggled with fertility problems. They had used a surrogate to give birth to their first 2 children, twins. They wanted more children, and, well, here's how Congressman Franks explained it, quote, "Due to my familiarity and experience with the process of surrogacy, I clearly became insensitive as to how the discussion of such an intensely personal topic might affect others," unquote. My panel's here with me, so it's not entirely clear how this was framed to staffers, but I think it's fair to say from the statement from the office of Speaker Paul Ryan, he wasn't quite buying the explanation necessarily, and even if he believed the explanation, he thought it was highly inappropriate for a member of Congress to harangue 2 female staffers into bearing his children to the point that they felt uncomfortable and intimidated.
The whole thing is gross, right? Like, this is gross. We have to remember that the version
not surrogacy,
of events...
we should say, not surrogacy, but trying to force a staffer. Right.
So the version of events that Trent Franks released last night, the statement, was probably the best version possible. This was coming out in his words from his office. It's going to be worse. He left immediately now. Speaker Ryan agreed. So we have to believe it was worse. But here's what, I don't get. I knew the problem of sexual harassment was bad in Washington on the Hill. I honestly didn't think it was this bad. That
this
stuff
is
like
just the
this
tip
creepy.
of the iceberg, though.
I mean, maybe that's naive. I worked in great offices that had great culture. This is unimaginable to me. I mean, truly. This is gross,
but
creepy,
don't you
weird.
think, okay, a week ago I was saying, how come the Me Too movement has spared Congress? How come Congress has this shell and they have not been, nobody has resigned, et cetera? Now here we are, 3 members of Congress, Conyers, Franken, and Franks. It's obviously hit Congress, but don't you think there's probably a lot more to come?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it, Jake, that this is, as you said, the tip of the iceberg. That said, I agree with Amanda. I would have expected maybe more boilerplate sexual harassment or assault. I know that sounds a little bit cynical, but I mean, as women, we've all experienced something, sure, or heard about something. But this level that we are seeing from some people like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world or now Trent Franks, it's just outrageous. And I think, it makes sense in this case that the speaker did what he did and it told him to resign immediately. I think we are seeing the start of a zero tolerance era.
Robbie, let me ask you a different question. I want to bring it back to Roy Moore for a second because that's obviously the pressing Senate race going on. A quote from September from Moore is getting some renewed attention today. He was asked by an African-American member of the audience, when was the last time that he thought America was great? And Moore responded, quote, "I think it was great at the time when families were united. Even though we had slavery, they cared for one another. Our families were strong. Our country had a direction." So sometimes lost in all this stuff about his alleged actions with young teenage girls is the fact that he says things like this.
Yeah, that are racist. Yeah. It's depressing. The idea that you can say things like this today and not only not pay a political cost, but it's almost celebrated by Steve Bannon and other people. I think about John McCain in 2008 on the campaign trail when someone called Obama a Muslim. So, you could argue that's less offensive than some of these other things that are going on. And McCain stopped, corrected them, and said that was wrong. George W. Bush, after 9/11, consistently said that America was not at war with the Muslim religion. We were at war with violent extremists. It's so irresponsible for people in power to incite other people to violence and to hatred like this. And I think I'm like a lot of people, I feel so helpless. It feels like anything we say here on this set makes no difference. We say the right thing and people just continue to do the wrong thing. And I'm optimistic we're going to get through this. There's a lot of factors that are putting this into play, but it's got to stop at some point. It's not okay. It's not.
I'll buy you a drink after the show. Everyone stick around. We have a lot more to talk about, new details about just how many documents have been collected in the investigation into Russia's election meddling, election interference. It's a staggering number. We'll tell you about it next.